Buddhism has been around for a couple thousand years, and it's spread pretty much all over the world. This means that we really can't say that such and such is what Buddhists believe or what they do, because there's so many kinds of Buddhism across history and around the globe. In this unit, you're going to read some stuff about bodies, ethics, and sexuality in Buddhism, starting with early Indian Buddhism. But these are just a few perspectives on these topics. You'll start by learning about some really negative perspectives on the body that were aimed at helping meditators overcome excessive levels of desire or attachment. Meditators in this kind of tradition would focus on the body as a source of suffering, which of course it often is, and cultivating this awareness would help reduce attachment to the body. When we talk about embodiment in Buddhism, we have to remember that we're not only talking about human bodies. In the classical Buddhist understanding, beings are reborn again and again into one of 6 different realms. A god realm and a demigod realm, which are kind of like heavenly rebirths, are 2 options. But there are also what are called the lower rebirths, where you can be reborn as an animal, a hungry ghost, or a hell being. And then there's also the human realm, which is just one possible option for rebirth. What determines which of these rebirths you get after you die is your karma. That is the accounting of good or bad actions that you did in this life and in the many lives before this one too. In each of those different rebirth options, you could end up with a different kind of body, right? You might think that being reborn in the God realm would be a really good thing, and I guess it is, probably, for a while. But even the gods will run out of the good karma that sent them there in the first place, and then they'll die and be reborn, possibly even into a hell realm. So Buddhists say that the best rebirth is a human rebirth. And that's because this is the life where we have just enough suffering and pain to motivate us to work for salvation. That is, to do the kinds of good actions following the Buddhist path that will lead to enlightenment, which is the final end of that cycle of rebirth. In the readings for this unit, you'll also learn about some very strange kinds of bodies that the Buddha is said to have had, and how his body is used in Buddhist stories to teach the Dharma. This means too that as Buddhism developed over time, new theories about the different kinds of bodies that the Buddha could have were developed. The theory about the 3 bodies of the Buddha, for example, says that the true body of the Buddha is called the Dharma body, the Dharmakaya, and this is a non-material body that doesn't age or die. In that form, the Buddha lives in what's called a Buddha realm, or a pure land. That's kind of like a heaven. According to this theory, the body that people knew of as the Buddha's body way back in India a long time ago was actually just one of several forms that he took. That was his so-called emanation body, his Nirmanakaya, which is the form that a Buddha takes to be visible to other beings. The third kind of form that a Buddha might take is called the enjoyment body, the Sambhogakaya. This is also an immaterial body, and it's made of a kind of subtle energy. The idea of the subtle body is really interesting, and it's important in Tantric Buddhism, or Vajrayana. Tantric Buddhist texts describe a subtle body that exists within all of us and is made up of energies called winds, prana, and drops, bindu, that circulate through channels all throughout the body. In Tantric meditation, then, people learn to perceive and control these energies as they are moving around the body. And by doing this, they can intentionally generate these states of extreme joy or bliss, which is said to be then one of the purest states of the mind. Using the body to generate sensations of joy is part of the path to enlightenment, rather than something that has to be suppressed, as it seemed like was the case in earlier Indian Buddhism. One of the problems for us today with the Buddhist ideas from early traditions is that there is a clear hierarchical ranking of bodies. In no uncertain terms, in the early texts of Buddhism, some bodies are better than others. Male bodies are better than female bodies, high status bodies are better than low status bodies, humans are better than animals. So your readings for this unit are going to give us some ways to think about that problem. One possible response might be to appreciate a tradition that values difference over commonality. So in other words, we could see in these early Buddhist texts that there are so many different kinds of bodies. It's not assumed that everyone is the same, right? We might think that it's important to develop an ethical theory, that is, like a set of beliefs or practices around what's good and right to do, that starts with the truth of difference, rather than one that emphasizes some core type of commonality. It's a good thing to celebrate the reality of differences that really shape who we are. And so maybe we can see a bit of that in early Buddhism. We'll also take a look in this unit at the different attitudes towards sex and sexuality that we can find in Buddhist traditions. Some of you might know that that many Buddhist monks and nuns are celibate, or at least according to the traditional rules for monks and nuns called the Vinaya, they're not supposed to have sex. But the fact is that many Buddhist teachers and practitioners have a lot to say about sex and sexuality, and celibacy is not the rule for most Buddhists throughout history, and certainly not today. In Vajrayana Buddhism, also called Tantric Buddhism, for example, sex and sexuality, either real or imagined, becomes highly regarded as a yogic and ritual practice. Although we might think of this as a sex-positive form of Buddhism, the traditional types of Tantric Buddhism in India or Tibet are actually totally heteronormative, and that would not be sex-positive from our point of view today. We'll have a chance also to read about some North American Buddhists who are really thinking about these ideas deeply and who are seeing or creating these connections between Buddhist doctrines of no self or emptiness and queer identities. For example, you'll have a chance to listen to a podcast interview with Ray Buckner, who's a transgender activist, academic, and author, who's doing some amazing work on Buddhism, queer and trans embodiment, and social injustice. In another podcast interview, Buddhist Studies professor Sharon Su will talk about a memoir she wrote about struggling with eating disorders and how Buddhist practice became helpful to her as she learned to experience her body in new ways. And you'll read a super interesting article on Buddhist mindfulness in the context of disability studies. Suzanne Mintz writes about how we could think about new ways of attending to experiences of pain, sexuality, and caregiving in ways that kind of really celebrate the interdependent nature of our embodiment. Another part of this unit is two sets of readings about race in North American Buddhism. There's a lot to say about this subject, and we'll only get an introduction to this topic in this course. We'll start with a couple of chapters from Joseph Hsieh's book, which is called Race and Religion in American Buddhism, White Supremacy and Immigrant Adaptation. This book talks about how racism and white supremacy have had a strong influence on the development of Buddhism in North America. The book helps us see what for many of us is almost totally invisible, which is how white supremacist ideologies are normalized in so much of Buddhism in North America especially. White supremacy is this invisible standard of normality for so many white Buddhists, especially in North America. To have a white supremacist orientation is just to think, without even knowing it, that white culture, meaning its beliefs, practices, values, and ideals, is just the norm. This is a really important book that talks in detail about how Buddhism was transmitted from Asia to the West and how it was shaped by the dominant white culture and ideologies in certain ways. Please study this book carefully and think about where you see these forces at work in your life or in your schoolwork. We'll also take a look at this in this unit at a short essay by Sharon Su that picks up on a lot of the themes that Joseph Hsieh's book talks about. Professor Su goes into incredible detail about the popularity of mindfulness meditation in the West and how that's related to the privileging of types of American Buddhism that are predominantly white. She also talks about the devaluing then of Asian American kinds of Buddhist practice, which are thought to be more focused on devotional activities and are therefore somehow less authentic. What she wants us to understand in this article is not only the workings of white privilege in North American Buddhism, but also she wants to go a step further into thinking about how meditation as a practice could be reshaped to be able to be used as a healing tool. She suggests that we could do this partly by reorienting our attention to the body, giving less focus on the mind. So she says, let's think about how the body could be the center of practice in Buddhism. Finally, as part of this unit, I'd really like you to spend some time learning a bit about critical disability theory. You can read through a great survey article in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on this topic, which is a good overview of how disability can be analyzed from cultural, historical, social, and political perspectives. Since we're thinking about bodies in this course, critical disability studies can give us some really great ways to think about the kinds of social norms that define certain attributes of the body as so-called impairments, and about the social or cultural conditions that devalue certain kinds of bodies. I think as you study this topic, you'll start to see how ideas and practices of disability really pervade all aspects of culture, and how central it is to the experience of embodiment for everyone.